Over the last 10 years, the IC has invested a significant amount of time, money, and intellectual capital on initiatives, particularly technology initiatives, aimed at addressing the challenges facing analysis. For the most part, these initiatives were used to make the traditional approaches to analysis faster and better. There's no question they've helped, but the investments have really been insufficient at helping analysts to keep pace with the growing and evolving demands that they face. Dr. Finger's vision for an integrated intelligence enterprise really attempts to take advantage of the collective expertise, individually and together, of the intelligence officers, no matter what organization, no matter what physical location they're at, to really quickly pull that together in a collaborative fashion and generate insight and results and output that responds to the customer demands. The new approach, as we've discussed already in the conference, draws heavily on Web 2.0 experiences in the private sector as appropriate, and of course with the sufficient security measures. One point that I think is important to make is that while the approach to analysis is almost certainly going to evolve in more of a collaborative, distributed environment, there are certain things about analysis that are sacrosanct. Others have mentioned this, but I think it's noting again that in particular, we need to be able to maintain, strengthen, and make more explicit the analytic tradecraft and standards that are essential to quality analysis. In fact, moving to this environment, if we're clever about it, I think will help to ensure that those things are in fact stronger than ever. So how are we going to manage this panel today? First of all, I'd encourage everybody, if you haven't already, to log on, because we'd really like this to be an interactive, engaged session from the beginning. If anybody's having technical difficulties or issues, please raise your hand now so we can try to get some help to you to get you logged in now. I'd like to spend a few minutes, if those technical folks could help. There are a number of folks in the audience who seem to still be having trouble logging on. What I'm going to do is introduce very briefly our panelists, and they have got a number of comments they're going to make about the transformation effort, in particular the net generation impact. And then we've got a number of assertions that we've developed that we're going to put up one at a time. And we'd like to engage the audience and the panelists on whether those assertions are right, are wrong, or are maybe some right and some wrong. They're meant to be provocative. They're meant to provoke a discussion about just the challenges that we're going to face as a community moving forward into this net generation and Web 2.0 environment. But there is no right or wrong answer. They're meant to be provocative. Still having folks with technical difficulties? Brian, can we get some more help out here? With that, I'd like to start by introducing Sean Dennehy. Sean's got 15 years of experience in the intelligence community in multiple organizations and is currently the chief of CI's Intellipedia development, very well known for the briefings and the engagement he's done with the community on Intellipedia. So it's an honor to have him on our panel today. Sean?
Thank you, Teresa. Am I on? No. No? Mm-hmm. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we go. All right. First, I'd like to just note from the irony department, we're going to talk about net generation, but we've got a bunch of baby boomers and Generation X folks up here on the panel. They're going to talk about it, but so Sean, some people, some of us geezers get it. Yesterday, you met Sean Voltman, who's the Generation Y or millennial analyst. And I'm the Generation X analyst, but I'm a heretic among my colleagues who look at Intellipedia and blogs and A-Space, and they don't get it, and they certainly don't want to. They don't really see the value in it. Like Teresa and Sean, I've been pretty frustrated with the way that IT has been deployed in the intelligence community. Most of the tools until recently are geared towards the individual knowledge worker. Almost all of the tools do not work with one another. You can't mash up these tools. Even the developers have a name for the tools, and General Clapper referred to it earlier today, a shoebox. Think about that for a second, a shoebox. When I think of a shoebox, I think of four walls with a lid on top. doesn't necessarily scream collaboration and openness, does it? And then I've also interacted with some of the knowledge management people across the community, and they often say, well, if we could only get people to get that information out of their shoebox. And my answer is, well, why not have them not put it in the shoebox to begin with? Don Burke from the CIA's DS&T and I, as well as a small group of lead users across the intelligence community, have been encouraging IC officers to get that information out of those shoeboxes and move them onto platforms such as Intellipedia, the Intellink blogs, Tag Connect, and many of the other tools that have been deployed by intelligence community enterprise services, which is an invaluable part of the community. And we've been encouraging viral adoption. So there hasn't been a top-down forcing people to do it. We want people to actually find value in the tools for what they're doing in their day-to-day work, and transfer or replace those existing processes and move those processes into these tools. And we've had some success, and we are continuing to encourage others to take advantage of them.
Thanks, John. Our next panelist is Dr. Anup Ghosh. Anup is a research professor and chief scientist at the Center for Secure and Information Systems at George Mason, and before that he was at DARPA. Anup?
Thank you, Teresa. Am I on yet? No? Okay. So I guess maybe I count as a Generation Xer, and so I am a bit surprised that there's resistance from our generation towards these online tools. What I wanted to focus on, I think there's some sentiment that people get enamored with tools, and rather than the products from the tools. The tools are meant to increase our productivity, efficiency, and quality, but then a lot of time is just spent on learning tools, of course. So just some commentary on that. I think in addition to having tools, we need to have the right incentives in place so these tools are leveraged properly. It's been already discussed that information hoarding is more common than information sharing, and also that significant disincentives exist in the community for information sharing. So the question here, is unless we find a way to address the incentives issues, I think we can have the best tools, but little sharing and little collaboration. Or in other words, if you built these tools without the right economic incentives in place, both for organizations and for individuals, would anyone really come? Would anyone really contribute? And almost all of these tools in the Web 2.0 space are based on contributions. You get network effects from people who are contributing. So coming from the academic sector, in the academic sector, we're very good at looking not only at other people's contributions as well as our own, but also measuring them. And so there are some models here for the Intel community that can be potentially borrowed or adapted from the academic community. So for example, many of you might be familiar with citation indices, where, as an author, you're measured by the amount of citations your work has produced. And more recently, there's been a proposed index, it's actually in play, called the H index. And the H index is a measure of the number of papers you've written that have the same number of citations from other papers. So it's a little hard to get your head around, but for example, if I had a citation H index of 40, that would have meant I wrote 40 papers that have all been cited more than 40 times by other people in the community. And so what's the relevance of that? Well, it's a measure of my scientific output or my contribution rather than the number of papers I've written. And I think those types of measures, when applied to Intel or to Intel analysts, will tend to reward quality contributions over quantity. And it would be nice, in fact, to have a system in place of incentives where organizations, teams, and individuals are rewarded based on their contributions. My particular area of expertise is in security, And I noted Mike Wertheimer's comments earlier yesterday on security. And I think his comments were really apropos. Sharing is going to happen. Now, it is the job of the security folks to meet the challenge. And from my perspective, I think we need to take security off the table as an excuse not to share. And in order to do that, I think this is all tied in with this economic model. We do need full accountability, for instance, on all information products we produce. And by accountability, I mean who wrote that product, where are these contributions into every product? Can we provide the provenance of each of the contributions? Can we ensure originator control? Can we ensure that credit for contribution flows back to individuals and teams? And do we have a reward structure for both putting in contributions, recognize those contributions, and even for people who counter a given analysis? I think I'm going to end my comments right now to there and contribute later.
Thanks, Anup. Our last panelist is David Gilmour, who's the CEO of Tacit Software, a leading provider of technology to automate expertise sharing, social search, and collaboration. Before that, David was the senior researcher and co-founder of GIGA, which is an organization that did a lot of research on information systems, information technology, changing business models, and has done a lot of work, actually, that's quite relevant to this topic in a previous life as well. So with that, David.
Thank you, Teresa. I have to confess I'm already alarmed at the direction of this panel. Sean, to my left, has introduced himself as a geezer, youthful as he is. That must make me a fossil of some kind. And I just pray that General Clapper has made it to his cab so he doesn't have to figure out what that makes him, because obviously time is passing us all by very quickly here. Nevertheless, I wanted to bring you a hopeful tale from the private sector about transformation that has some analogies that may be interesting. In 1992, if you can think way back then, the research and advisory business for technology was dominated by the Gartner Group, Meta Group, some companies that I'm sure some of you in the private sector here know. The business was essentially developing and selling intelligence on the computer industry to CEOs and CIOs that had to make decisions about what products to buy and what strategies to pursue. It was dominated by services where you would subscribe from the Gartner Group to the database service or the mainframe service. Very siloed. The more money you paid, the thicker the reports were that landed on your desk to justify the decisions that you'd already decided you were going to make anyway. There was a question and answer service you could call in at great expense and talk to a smart person. And I was at a technology company. I got a call from Gideon Gartner, the founder of the Gartner Group, who was in retirement in Aspen, and said, I'd like you to join me to create a company that acknowledges that the world's changed and now all these technologies relate to each other. The siloed model's not any good anymore. You can't separate a database problem from a mainframe problem. Furthermore, I want to sell this as a single service. I want there to be one unified research service and you just buy access to it. And furthermore, I want it to be customer driven. I want every single piece of research we write to come ultimately from a question from one of our customers so that our research agenda is automatically guided by the flow of interest of our customers. And finally, I'd like it all to be electronically delivered on the internet. Are you in? So of course I said, that sounds great. And we built the world's fastest growing IT advisory company, took it public, then private again, and later sold it. And today, those sorts of expectations have become standard in the IT research and advisory world. Along the way, questions like, well, how do you manage analysts in that environment? How do you motivate them? How do you incent them? How do you give them a vision for their own careers when they don't have a fixed turf? Those all came up. How do you distinguish between in-process and finished research product? What does it mean to have living research that's continuously changing? How do you involve the customer? Should they be a collaborator or should they be the audience? And without going into answers to all those, I'm sure they'll come up. The bottom line is that those questions had solutions. The transformation succeeded. The customers loved it. So it's a worthy and achievable goal. The only other thing I'd like to say here before passing it on is that for those of you, earlier yesterday, We talked about, I guess, how many people knew about Web 2.0 or were involved, and an alarmingly small number of hands went up. So here is my recommended crash course for everybody in this room in their private moments to go off, become a Web 2.0 expert in 3 or 4 hours at your own private computer. My number one recommendation, if you don't already understand it, visit Wikipedia, the public analog of Intellipedia, which you can do in the open kind of way. Find an article that interests you and go ahead and pen a contribution to it that is knowingly wrong. Okay, this is a form of terrorism, but you'll understand my meaning in a second. Watch the way you are purged out of the system and your remarks, unhelpful as they are, disappear and are overwritten by others. Watch it work and see how it works. Experience it. Number 2, go to Delicious and decide that you are going to understand what social bookmarking is and why the wisdom of the crowd can help guide decisions in a way that's vastly more efficient than a management process that has to be explicitly managed. Pick a subject you like, go there, and see how somebody else already found all the great stuff long before you could. You can do it in a few minutes. And if you want to see the future of collaboration and try our stuff, go to Illumio, ILLUMIO.com. This requires some friends. Download Illumio onto your computer. It will learn who you are from your email, your browsing history, and your documents. It will keep that completely private, a security compartment of one. Then subscribe to a group and watch all the content of the internet come in, be filtered through who you are and what your interests are, and be rated 1, 2, or 3 stars in terms of whether you should be reading it or not. Then get a group together, 4 of your friends, sit around a table just like this, have someone type a question, and watch how the person who knows the most about it will get a pop-up first, private to them, saying, hey, would you like to answer this question? And if they decline, watch how the next pop-up will go to somebody else until you get a collaborator to work on what you want to work with. It's free, it's automatic, and everything I've described to you is free and available online, downloadable now. Everybody in this room should have this experience. My call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I would add one more to that. If you haven't checked out Digg, D-I-G-G, look at Digg. That's another one that's a great Web 2.0 technology that is ubiquitous, and it really does illustrate how people rating reports or information rank than how many people have looked at it and how interesting it is. With that, I get a note from the technical folks. If you're still having difficulties, email your questions as we move into this next phase of the panel to bdrake, D-R-A-K-E, at Deloitte, DELOITTE.com, and Brian will post the questions. What we'd like to do now is take advantage of the Web 2.0 wisdom of the crowds and get all of you to help engage us in a discussion around some assertions that we've put forth about this transformation effort. And again, they're meant to be provocative. Some are right, some are wrong, some are not. You can debate either side. So with that, I'd like to, the first slide, please. The next slide, please. There we go. Okay, assertion 1. I'll give you a minute to read this assertion. A part of the challenge that we've heard is that tradecraft, if we go to a Web 2.0 world, we're going to lose the analytic tradecraft. And so this assertion says that a Web 2.0 environment can result in better analytic tradecraft than today's existing systems. How many people believe this is true? Okay, how many people believe this is false? All right, so a lot of you don't have any belief one way or another, or else you're too chicken to guess. You think it's a loaded question. What I'd like to do on this one, I think, is turn to David to get some conversation going around this issue, because this is a very critical issue surrounding quality of intelligence coming out of an emergent technology or environment like Intellipedia. How do you make sure that it adheres to the tradecraft standards and sourcing standards that we've put forth? David.
I don't know if we have a question yet, but I'll look for one here, because that's going to be our format to try to see if any of you have typed in questions as we go through each of these assertions. But I guess Teresa really said it. The common assumption is that in the user-generated content world of Web 2.0, you will have chaos. Everybody will be writing their opinions. There'll be, a mixture of stuff. You won't be able to have any idea who's accountable or what the positions are. Tradecraft standards will go down through the floor, and all sorts of other bad stuff will happen. All I would say is that it is possible to overlay management concepts of authority and concepts of review onto living, changing, user-generated content in the web. And as a manager of research, it is a wonderful thing to be able to see the various points of view play off back and forth each other before you have to put your thumbprint on saying this is finished product and we're going to take this part to the customer. It's far less risky than sitting there in a cubicle and hoping you've gotten it right. So actually, that's why I believe this is the case. Let's see if there's a question here, if anybody else wants to. Anup.
Sure, I'll go ahead and read the question. So the technology is great, but presents new challenges in managing the quality. What ideas does the panel have for managing the quality of such fast-moving, on-demand intelligence? I think that gets to the heart of the first assertion. And just a couple of comments. I think Web 2.0 technologies is not a substitute for good analysis. I think the main point to derive from the tools is you now have the ability to draw on the collective wisdom of a community. And in the old system, intelligence analysis is processed through channels and vetted through channels. The real opportunity here is to say, look, anybody who's got a brain who becomes an expert on a given topic doesn't necessarily have to go through a chain of management to have their opinion out there. But that is not a replacement, not a substitute for good analytic tradecraft. And so we need to ensure through process that good arguments are made, that structured argumentation and evidentiary support still continue. And another point to that is there's a concept of published versus unpublished contributions. And so, for example, you can have an online conversation per se where you're debating the merits and demerits of a given analysis. But at some point, you want to be able to reach enough vetting, enough structured argumentation so you can publish that. And the idea behind publishing is to say you're providing guarantees of persistence of that document so that it can be cited in other documents in the future. Now, you can, over time, of course, update your arguments, and those might be revisions to that. But it is important to draw a line between, in my mind, between published and unpublished arguments.
I think I'd follow up on Anup's comments with, Ross Mayfield, who's kind of a thought leader on these Web 2.0 technologies, talks about when should you use these in a business or inside the firewall. And he talks about if you're trying to make a process, like Anup mentioned, more transparent and more participatory. And we all heard Dr. Fingar yesterday mention that he wants to make analysis more transparent. And he also wants to create a community of analysts, i.e. participatory. So by moving these tradecraft processes into these tools, we can still maintain tradecraft, but then get the benefits of more participation and more transparency. Our existing process, when you look at a piece of quote-unquote finished intelligence, it doesn't have a lot of transparency to it. Often it doesn't cite its sources. You don't know if it's been languishing in coordination for 3 months, 3 days, or 3 hours. Whereas these open tools allow you to be able to kind of see how many people contributed to it, how long has it been looked at, how many people have edited this article, and you can apply other tools and extensions against these to help evaluate the content that's contributed.
I think we may have one question from the audience back here.
Okay.
Yeah, my name's John Schlissel. I'm with Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. I have a question regarding Web 2.0 environment with respect to the wisdom of crowds. The data point being the stock market, how do you deal with the manic boom and bust cycle that the stock market periodically goes through, where you see excessive optimism and or excessive pessimism. And how do you deal with that in a situation dealing with military deception? Witness 1973, where the vast majority of Israeli military intelligence thought there would not be an attack by the Egyptians and the Syrians.
I'll try that one. I for one, actually believe it's the other way. I believe that the process of management stands a greater risk of homogenizing intelligence into a single comfortable viewpoint than an environment in which individual analysts with management oversight can stake out positions with attribution, associate their reputations and careers publicly with those positions, and in so doing, create an opportunity for those with contrarian viewpoints to stake out those viewpoints and publicly go after the opposite kind of opinion. So you can manage as much diversity of opinion as you'd like by allowing and giving the gold seal of management review to 1, 2, or 3 different versions on what X means and then the customer can not only see the contrarian view alongside the main view, but can get a sort of an eyeball view of what the range of diversity is and how much reputation value each diverse opinion has. That's incredibly valuable to allow a decision maker to decide what's the level of consensus. If you just get a report dropped on your desk that purports to be the only view or pays lip service to contrarian views, you have less of that. So, I actually think this sort of cuts the other way.
There's some great questions coming up.
I know, there's these great adversaries, yeah.
I'm going to read one. This is for David, so I'll read it and you can answer it. If Web 2.0 provides the great advantages you describe, how do we keep our adversaries from using it for the same advantage? That's a great question.
Wow, well.
It's loaded.
It is loaded. I mean, presumably this is not a question about the mechanics of security and protecting our own networks. I assume that what this means is if the paradigm of this open user-generated content world is adopted by us, how will others not use it against us? I think the very bad news here is that others are using it brilliantly against us now.
Right.
Exactly.
The organization of organizations into cells and networks that read each other's public opinion to get signals of what to do is way more distributed and way more forward-looking than a hierarchical command and control kind of structure. It's being used against us now.
Right.
We are late to the table here.
Yeah, that horse has already left the barn. And at this point, it's a matter of catch-up for the Intel community to be able to leverage the wisdom of its crowds. In fact, there is a model here. I think we tend to think of the intelligence community in an insular fashion. But there is a model here where you do leverage the entire open source community to advantage, just like the adversaries do, right?
And I would chime in that they have been using it. We have not. Many times when we are teaching or in our sabbatical program that we've established about the web, we have to teach people what the difference is between Netscape and Internet Explorer and Firefox, and what the difference between a left click and a right click is. So we are well behind what our adversaries are doing. The intelligence community, and specifically my organization, has denied that the web is, has existed for, essentially 10 years, and now we're trying to catch up. We often joke that it's kind of hard to adopt the Web 2.0 approach when we were never Web 1.0.
Right. Okay, with that, there's one question that's quite good that has to deal with the tools exist, but the bigger issue is whether the culture allows for their use. What is being done by leadership to ensure that these tools are more than just show? We'll come to that question. In fact, it may be the next assertion in dealing about the cultural issues, because a lot of this really is all about the culture and the leadership. Can you post the next assertion, please? We talked a little bit about this assertion earlier, and I've heard sort of back-channel chatter about this issue that somehow a Web 2.0 environment will result in homogenized intelligence, that Collaboration is going to pull together all the views of the community into one homogenized view. How many people believe this is true? How many believe this is false? I think this is a really important assertion to talk about, Sean, maybe you can take the lead in some comments as the questions come in. One other point before we move ahead. We're documenting all these questions. Keep in mind the follow-up sessions that we're going to have the 13th and then in October. Please continue to keep your thoughts and questions coming and attend those sessions so that we can address those questions at that point. Sean?
This is a question we get, and actually I was quoted about homogenized intelligence the first time we talked about Intellipedia. But I would encourage you guys to go and Google the wiki and the blog. It was the paper that was mentioned in the video. It's a paper that's written by Cal Andrus of CIA, is now with the Center for Mission Innovation. And everyone focuses on the wiki and the blog. Oh, so the wiki and the blog is all about technology. And they forget about the second part of the title of that paper, which is towards a complex adaptive intelligence community. And if you go back and you read that paper, it's about changing our culture, changing and allowing individuals to act. And we saw yesterday the power of allowing individuals to act in wrapping up Timothy McVeigh and the Millennium Bomber and whatnot. So these tools empower individuals to act. In addition, while we have brought the same MediaWiki software as Wikipedia into the intelligence community, we are not implementing it in the same way as Wikipedia. Most notably, the one overarching view for Wikipedia is, or approach or policy within Wikipedia is neutral point of view. So if you go to Wikipedia and you try and put in a political viewpoint on Scientology or abortion or George W. Bush, they rip it out, or it will eventually get removed because it needs to be a neutral point of view. We do not enforce a neutral point of view in Intellipedia or with the blogs or other things, because we don't want to boil down to what we can all agree on. That is homogenized intelligence. What we encourage is attributable point of view, where either individuals or agencies or can do team A, team B analysis on various topics, and capture the disagreements on those topics, because we're the intelligence community. We can't agree on anything, period. If you look at across the community, from the minute you're brought into the community, you're taught that you need to own your issues. So immediately you look at a person, a subject matter expert in another agency, and you try and find where you disagree with that person, and you'll always find some type of disagreement, because that way you own your issue. If you agreed with them 100%, you would kind of be like sharing, and we can't do that. You need to own your issue. So.
Okay, some of the questions we're getting related to this. Let's see.
There's a highlighted one here that I think the moderator is directing our attention to. How do we make sure that we support those working in the trenches on those issues not currently on the radar that may suddenly be necessary to respond rapidly to a new threat? How do you focus the attention of the resources of the analytic community as a whole? If you imagine the young Web 2.0 savvy analysts throughout the IC coming into an environment where they can see two things: the flow of questions from customers, the wish list of answers, if you will, in some fairly visible way, and also the gaps in where there are incomplete work or questions from those who've written in certain areas saying, this other related area is unknown to us. And then you allow them to show their productivity by grabbing from those lists and deciding where their experience, knowledge, and creativity, and the direction of their management has them best focused, and give them the ability to get something started, an informal idea memo of some kind, a kickoff note that's the beginning of the process, long before it maybe becomes even visible. You can have a market-based approach where analysts will see it in their interest to get recognition by staking out positions and covering topics which are otherwise unaddressed. And it just kind of can work. So I think that's one way of focusing.
Yeah, in the academic research community, that's long been a position for a budding researcher, is you want to stake out your own ground in order to make a name for yourself. And I understand that sometimes it's part of the problem is incentives tend to be more individual focused than team focused. But I think the sentiment of the question was, if rewards are currently based on current citations, how do you get people to focus more on longer term unexplored areas? And the reality is, if you're able to see beyond the horizon compared to your colleagues and point to potential disruptions in other areas, and you write those papers and you do your homework properly, when those come to bear, you will be cited. Your work will rise in the citation index as being the seminal paper that highlighted this particular issue. So I think the model works for underexplored areas as well.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'd like to skip the next assertion and go to assertion 4, please.
Hey, Teresa, before we go, I think we have
Yes.
one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right here.
Yes.
Teresa, going back to the last assertion, the question's asked in terms of being homogenized,
Right.
but in Web 2.0, a lot of the cultural curve is you have few contributors and a lot of lurkers. And so I would really say, how are you going to deal with biased intelligence? Because the voice of the few in the early adoption is going to be overwhelming the voices of the many who are just now observing. And because people believe what they read as being the truth, you have a tendency to actually bias intelligence.
Well, I think part of the answer to that question is incentives. I think a lot of people lurk today because they're either not comfortable in operating in that environment, or they don't see it as rewarding to their career. So I think part of the answer to that is trying to create more incentives for analysts to participate in those environments, to share their views, even if they're still nascent, and engage in discussions online. And if they're rewarded for that, I think you'll see more contributions to those fora, so that you do get a broader view of and a broader assessment of what the analytic community thinks.
A quick and dirty way to do this would be to, first of all, give every analyst the instruction that in any given month they have to open up 3 new areas, participate in 10 with some sort of comment, and you write 1 finished thing, or come up with some numbers. Then management goes around and watches these things in different states of maturity. And when a new one shows up, and there's very little wisdom of the crowd yet, and it's maybe the minority view is dominating, it's in a red state, which means immature, still bringing in contributors, still attracting the right experts to come in and weigh in. And then it comes in a yellow state when there's been some level of interaction that's been complete, some number of participants or readers, some amount of feedback. And then it enters a green state when reviews about the underlying fact-checking and adequacy of citations are added. And then the customer or other analysts go in and say, yeah, here's a red one. I'm not sure I'm going to use this in what I'm doing. I'm going to refer to this green one over here. So the maturity cycle of any particular piece of research can be modulated and managed. The incentives can be tied to the maturity cycle and the role of the contributor. And it's not really rocket science to do that.
Right. So my additional comment, I think a really important point to all of this is, I think a lot of people view the Web 2.0 technologies as writing email. And I've got an opinion, and it won't be vetted through a normal process. And I think that's a real concern. And because of that, there needs to be structured argumentation and evidence on any given topic. And that has to be part of the training. There needs to be templates put out there on how you do analysis online. And if I'm forced in advocating a position, if I'm forced as part of that process to cite, here are the refuting arguments, and better yet, put links to refuting articles, that at least gives other people an indication. One, I understand the area. I know what other people are saying. It also gives other people an opportunity to review the same evidence, potentially explore on their own using dig-like tools what other people have been saying and begin to contribute in that way. And I think without that template, without the structured argumentation and evidence analysis, it can appear to be chaotic. But even then, Wiki is a great example of a system as chaotic as it is, it ends up rationalizing in the end.
And I think just to tag on to that is that we have moved some of those templates into Intellipedia and the blogs, and the users of Intellipedia and the blogs recognize that there's flaws in these tools, that they don't do, Wikipedia bringing it into the intelligence community isn't going to solve all of our ills. That there's going to be some specific extensions that need to be added to Intellipedia and to Web 2.0 tools inside the community that will help us perform some of these tasks. A bot that can scan articles and flag an article that only has one contributor to it or 2 or 3 contributors to it, that can be done automated. And we've actually put together a kind of a short list, which will be available at the front table here, of these desired capabilities that contractors can look at, and probably some of these tools can be written in the amount of time that we're going to be up here on this panel. They're really simple tools, but they just need to be applied in the environment.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'd like to go on to the next assertion, which is really an important one. The current IC analytic culture is diametrically opposed to the adoption of Web 2.0 technologies. How many people agree with this one? How many people disagree? Not a lot of takers on this one. A lot of the issues that have been debated and discussed revolve around the culture, the rewards and incentives, not just of the analysts, but the management and the leaders. Do we really know, do the leaders really understand the power of what these tools can do? Or, as I know many of us have heard, is Intellipedia, is that just play? Analysts aren't doing their real work. They don't have time for that. We've got to get them focused on their real work, which is creating product.
Since we didn't have much disagreement on it, maybe we can go to the next assertion, which talks about the culture, I believe.
Okay. Is there any issues or comments on that one in particular? I can't really see. Yes.
Question here. If you change the word analytic to acquisition culture, would the answer be the same?
Very good point. Very good point. Okay, let's go to the next assertion. Oh, sorry, yes.
There's been a lot of focus on customer needs in here.
Right.
How do the customers feel about these moves? Has anybody asked them? Will it make a difference to them?
I think that's a valid question, and those of us that are long-term analysts and have been around this community for 25, 30, 40 years know that that's always been a tricky issue, getting customer feedback. And so I think the challenge is, how do we figure out some measures that allow us to, in a meaningful way, go to the customers with the output or results of this sort of new way of working to get that insight. How do you do that? Because that's very tricky in our space for a number of reasons. But it is being talked about, and there have been pilots proposed to actually include customers in some of these collaborative venues as part of the collaboration effort to get a real-time feedback on how effectively they think these new approaches really do address what their needs are. Sean, you want to try to address that at all?
I think it's an education process. Just like we're educating people, analysts and intelligence community officers about these tools, we need to educate our customers about these tools. What so often comes up is, oh, well, what if a customer goes to Intellipedia and they don't have time to look at the history of the Intellipedia article? They're not going to do that. They're just going to rip whatever it is and take it off and run with it. We have to educate them that, hey, this is emergent knowledge. This isn't finished intelligence. It's not the official position of the intelligence community or any particular agency. This is where analysts and IC officers across the community are using this to gather their knowledge. And we need to caveat that appropriately with our customers, not take everything, at what's exactly presented in Intellipedia. Or in our customers, we have to remember our customers are fairly smart people too. They're going to know what a blog is. They're going to know they know, hopefully, what Wikipedia is by now. So when they see Intellipedia, they know, most of them will probably go, oh, well, that's just like Wikipedia. I'm not sure if I can trust that. Which is what all the academics say about Wikipedia, although it's now the 8th or 9th most visited website in the world, because people are finding value there. So the main thing that we've been focusing on in this initial approach to all of these tools is, do people find value in them? Do people are using them to capture their knowledge? If they find value in them, if there's utility in these tools, then it's a positive thing. But we definitely do need to educate our customers of what we're trying to do here.
Teresa, I think we've got another question for you.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment from the perspective of the State Department, where my customers reside. There's a lot of use being made on the CIPRNet system of various country sites and whatnot that are putting up bios. In fact, some like the Philippines, the embassy in the Philippines has an extraordinary site for bios with over, I think, 150 bios there of various people in that country. So the actual State Department policymakers are actually contributing to Intellipedia sites, which raises two interesting questions, though, for us. The first is the firewall between intelligence and policymakers. If we're all contributing to the same sites on CIPRNet, that firewall has been lowered, if not destroyed. And so we have to, I think, revisit that question of where those sensitivities lie. Another question is, if we are going to conduct the nasty business of dialoguing and flaming and arguing and debating our various positions on intelligence questions in front of the policymakers, it raises some real issues for how much of that we want to allow them to see. Do we simply want to provide finished products, or do we want to allow them to see the discussion that was mentioned earlier as a great thing for managers to see, but is it such a great thing for policymakers? So it raises some interesting issues for those of us who have to work on the CIPRNet system.
Yeah, I think there's no question that this will require some consideration of new rules of engagement between intelligence and customers. It's almost certainly not going to be a one-size-fits-all. It's going to be on a case-by-case basis where it makes sense, and it'll have to be very carefully managed, no question about it, for all the reasons you stated. So,
something unexpected that's worth pointing out is that sometimes if you make transparent the genealogy of a particular analytic position, so that you can see that its underpinning assumptions themselves other positions through links, as Anup was describing, then in a way it actually makes it safer to overlay one different assumption, for example, from a customer, without having to distort the entire analytic process. If you just believe that fact 3 is wrong, it's an assumption that you as a policymaker believe for whatever reason goes the other way, then you can commission another chain of thought that reverses fact 3 and hypothetically generates a set of results as if that happened, without bringing down the credibility of the process as you do so, because of the modular nature of the way these things interact. So it actually may be more of an escape valve, and more transparency might help the problem rather than hurt it.
Good
sort of
point.
a contrarian view.
One more question?
I wanted to speak on this topic as well. I think it's a very interesting question. It speaks directly to some of the barriers, I think, mentally and structurally that we face in this new era. But I would offer a couple things. First of all, I've talked with younger folks in the net or whatever generation. I'm not sure which generation I am. I don't know that I have a letter. Well, I strive to have a letter these days, but kidding. So you ask a kid, a teenager, who has just spent a lot of time putting a lot of highly personal information out on MySpace, and you say, maybe it's the information in this particular example, is information on a date that happened and that caused a relationship of this teenager to fail, and all this personal jazz went out on MySpace. And the question was asked, why would you put all that? This is your dirty laundry that you're airing on purpose in public. What are you doing this for? And he says, well, I'm sharing this with my friends. And the answer is, well, anyone can read this. And he said, well, anyone wouldn't want to. Only my friends would be interested. So the idea is that in this generation of access, ubiquitous access to data, some of which is highly personal, some of which is whatever, we're going to draw that which we need because we don't have time to draw everything that we might, be able to come across. So I think policymakers, last time I checked, are fairly busy folk, and they're not going to necessarily have time, and maybe I'm sure there are the exceptions out there, but they're not going to necessarily have time to watch all the flaming and blogging, and in fact would probably be paying us to, in fact, be doing that. But they're not going to really have time to get down in those weeds, I don't think. Especially as we move more and more and more towards this culture where everyone is doing it, the data volume's too high. And on a related note, I wanted to offer something that we at NSA deal with very much every day, is that the definition of customer for us, and I'm sure for a lot of people, not trying to be exclusive, means a couple of things. One definition is, in fact, that person who lives outside the NSA enterprise, who receives finished SIGINT products with which they do, further analysis, do all source analysis, whatever. But we have many, many customers that are inside what we call the SIGINT system. And a lot of our data, a lot of our information is enabling information. It's not finished anything. And these kinds of systems, these Web 2.0 technologies, I think would be incredibly helpful as we struggle within our own agency, our own enterprise, our own network to share raw, unfinished, uncooked data with people. And some of that data, in fact, should be shared with those external customers, probably.
Just one more. Can you go to assertion 6? I'd like to end, because we're getting the hook, with just a brief discussion about this point, because I think this is really a critical point as well. The assertion is that analytic transformation will never be complete. And if I could add an extension to that assertion, it would be that innovation is always going to be a critical part of analysis moving forward. We'll never get to the point where we were pre-Soviet Union, where we understood what we did, everybody knew their place, everybody worked happily in their cube doing their thing. This whole process of innovation will never stop. How many people agree with that notion? How many people disagree? So the challenge, that's a good news thing, I think. The challenge is, how do we think about experimenting with some of these things in ways that lend us insights into what works and what doesn't work through places like a space, and be able to quickly kill those things that clearly are not helpful, and grow and nurture those things that are helpful, and use that as an approach to evolving in the future to different ways of working, different ways of collaborating, different ways of engaging potentially with customers. Do you guys have any thoughts on that point before we? No?
There's one more remark out in the back.
Okay, question?
Yeah, I got one. L. Prendergast from Army. To your left.
Oh, yes, sorry.
And the
I
lights
can't
in your
see.
eye. I hear a lot of good things here with this and the Web 2.0 and even yesterday, and I'm still kind of new to this whole thing. So my first frustration is when I go out on the internet, on either SIP or JWICS or whatever, to find out what is going on with all this transformation, I don't know where to go, so there's not one specific place
Actually,
that I'm aware of.
Intellipedia has a lot of information on the initiatives.
Okay, that's
that
good
are
to know,
growing.
because I'll make sure everybody else knows that below me. But I've heard about this Analysis 101 course that the DNI has established.
Right.
So my question is this coming up in the class training on the Web 2.0 to the analysts coming through?
They are getting an exposure to Intellipedia and some of the emergent technologies and techniques in Analysis 101. They are still dealing with the ramp up, given the number of analysts that they're trying to put through, and my guess is they'll get more of that sort of content over time, but they are being exposed to those technologies in the course.
There's, I think we have one more in the back center.
Okay, in the back?
Inside the community, and does the customer need exposure to that issue? And my reflection on that was, as a former NIO, going downtown and giving people briefings, I got 3 questions. The first was, what does the community believe on X? The second was, what do you believe? And the third one was, what are the differences inside the community? So we are exposing that generally to the policymaker all the time, saying this is how they've lined up, this is why they believe the things they believe. So the real question is not, do we let them see it? It's whether we let them see it as we're developing our position, or do we decide to package it later and present it as we do our briefings? Because that question has always been there, and the discerning customer is always wanting to know, where do the differences lie within the PLC? And I say a little bit more transparency would be good.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Well, on that note, again, let me remind everybody, the follow-up sessions, we'd love to get more questions, thoughts, ideas. If you have time to reflect on this, please do come back and participate. I'd like to thank my panelists who've all been fantastic with ideas and suggestions, and thank you for your time.